In the vast expanse of the Zarnax Empire, where powerful fleets ruled the stars, there existed a ship that no one took seriously. The Signet was often referred to as the weakest ship in the entire fleet. The Zarnax were known for their massive warships, each one brimming with advanced weaponry, armor, and state-of-the-art technology. The Signet, however, was the complete opposite. It was small, old, and had a crew made up of various alien species that couldn't even match the Zarnax in strength, intelligence, or skill. To the Empire, it was nothing more than a training ship, one meant to carry out simple tasks and rarely involved in any serious battle. But everything changed when the humans arrived. The Zarnax had heard rumors about humanity, though they were dismissive of the stories. A species that thrives on nothing but brute force, they'd muttered. How could they possibly make a difference? Yet, when the Empire received a strange order from their high command, they had no choice but to comply. The Signet, for all its flaws, would be assigned a human crew. Captain Ilias Ford stood at the front of the ship, a steady figure in a universe full of chaos. He was calm, collected, and not at all intimidated by the task ahead. His team of humans, diverse in their skills, but united in their determination, was ready for the challenge. While the rest of the galaxy underestimated their species, humans had a reputation for being resourceful, and Ford intended to show that. The Signet had seen better days. Its hull was scratched and dented from years of neglect. The engine systems hummed weakly, as though unsure of their own strength. The weapons systems were outdated, and the crew quarters were cramped. Yet Ford saw potential. He didn't believe in fighting battles with what you had. He believed in making the best of what you were given. The first thing he did was gather his crew and begin assessing the ship, its strengths, and its weaknesses. "We have a lot of work to do," Captain Ford said, his voice echoing through the ship's old command center. "But I know one thing for sure. We're going to make this ship something no one will forget." The human crew immediately set to work, not waiting for approval from the Zarnax, who had watched in silence from afar. They had no doubt the ship would eventually fall apart under the strain, and they couldn't imagine how humans could make any difference. But Ford wasn't concerned with the Zarnax expectations. He knew his people. The human race had always thrived under impossible odds. Human engineers were the first to begin modifications. They installed AI systems capable of learning and adapting in real time, far beyond anything the Zarnax had ever seen. They scavenged parts from old, abandoned ships and put them to use in the Signet. Slowly, the ship began to transform. The Signet, once considered nothing more than a relic of the past, was slowly becoming something else, something dangerous. The Zarnax were unaware of the changes happening right under their noses. They laughed at the thought of a human crew turning the weakest ship into anything of value. But they would soon learn that humans were never to be underestimated. And as the Signet prepared for its first mission under the human captain, the galaxy would soon discover that the weakest ship in the fleet was about to become its greatest weapon. The Signet had undergone several upgrades over the past few weeks, and now Captain Ilias Ford stood in the command center, staring at the star charts displayed on the screen. The crew had worked tirelessly, and the ship, once dismissed as weak, was finally ready for its first real mission. Ford wasn't sure if the Zarnax leadership would ever accept that the humans had turned the Signet into a real threat, but one thing was certain: they were about to find out. The mission was a simple one on paper: intercept and destroy a small rebel fleet that had been terrorizing nearby colonies. The Zarnax Empire had sent countless warships to deal with the rebels, but the Signet was going in. The rebels were known for their unpredictability, and it seemed like a perfect opportunity to test the humans' unconventional approach to warfare. As the Signet left the safety of the Zarnax spaceport, the crew remained calm, though their hearts raced with anticipation. They had faced skepticism from the Zarnax and even from other human colonies, who doubted their ability to accomplish anything meaningful. But Captain Ford believed in them. They weren't just here to survive. They were here to prove that humanity could rise above expectations. On the bridge, Ford turned to his crew. Remember, this isn't just about fighting. It's about adaptability. We don't have the luxury of brute strength like the Zarnax. We have to use what we have. And what we have is our minds. The crew nodded in unison, fully aware of the importance of this mission. They weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy. As they entered the area where the rebel fleet was last detected, the tension in the air was thick. Suddenly, their scanners lit up. The rebel fleet had arrived. The Signet was facing a dozen ships, each much larger and more heavily armed than their own. Most commanders would have been terrified, but Ford's human crew wasn't like any other. They'd prepared for this moment by studying every tactic, every strategy, every possible way to outthink their opponents. The human crew trusted their instincts, their ability to learn from each encounter and adjust on the fly. Ford gave the order, "Engage at full speed. Let's show them what we can do." At first, the Signet seemed outmatched. The rebel ships launched a full assault, firing powerful lasers and missiles, each shot seeming to target the Signet's weak spots. But instead of retreating, the human crew turned the ship's apparent disadvantages into strengths. They expertly maneuvered the ship through the rebel barrage, using evasive tactics the Zarnax would never have considered. They avoided direct confrontation, using speed and precision to strike from unexpected angles. The Signet's new AI system, programmed by human engineers, worked in harmony with the crew, analyzing enemy movements and providing real-time tactical adjustments. The ship's weapons, now modified with scavenged tech, fired laser blasts that hit their targets with deadly accuracy. It was a style of combat the rebels weren't prepared for, a combination of speed, unpredictability, and human ingenuity. Within hours, the rebel fleet was in disarray. The Signet hadn't lost a single ship, and the rebels were forced to retreat. Ford stood tall as he watched the enemy ships flee into the depths of space. "That's how we do it," Ford said, smiling. "The Empire might think we're weak, but we just proved we're anything but." The Zarnax command, watching from their distant command station, were silent. They had witnessed the unexpected outcome firsthand. The Signet had done the impossible, and the humans had made it happen. The once mock ship had just achieved victory in a way the Zarnax had never imagined. Captain Ford knew this was only the beginning. The Signet had proven that it was no longer the weakest ship in the fleet. It was now a force to be reckoned with, and the humans were the driving power behind it. After their unexpected victory, the Signet returned to the Zarnax Empire's main station, and the mood among the crew was one of quiet pride. Captain Elias Ford paced the command center, looking out at the stars, deep in thought. The Signet had won, but this was just the beginning. There was still much to prove, especially to the Zarnax who had only seen the ship as a weak and outdated relic. But Ford knew that they had turned the ship into something more. The real question was, how long would the Zarnax ignore what had been done? The Zarnax command sent representatives to meet with Ford and his human crew. They were curious but skeptical, expecting to find some explanation for the Signet's success that wouldn't involve the humans' surprising role in it. But Ford, as always, was calm and confident. He knew the importance of this meeting. "Captain Ford," one of the senior Zarnax officers said as he approached, "we've seen the battle results. The Signet, it shouldn't have won, but it did. Explain to us how your human crew managed this." The Zarnax officer was blunt, clearly unimpressed with the humans, but curious nonetheless. Ford gave a small smile. It wasn't about having the best technology or the largest fleet. It was about using what we had and making it work in ways no one expected. Humans don't just fight. We adapt. That's our strength. The officer raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Adaptation. This is war, Captain, not some strategy game." Ford didn't back down. "That's exactly what it is. But it's a strategy game where we learn from every mistake, where we use everything around us to survive. It's not just about the ship. It's about the people on it. My crew isn't afraid to think outside the box." The officer nodded slowly, still uncertain, but clearly intrigued. "Tell us more." And so, Ford explained how they had transformed the Signet using human ingenuity. The ship had been old, but instead of discarding its outdated systems, they had found ways to upgrade them. They had integrated AI systems designed to learn from every battle, allowing them to adapt quickly. They had scavenged technology from old, decommissioned ships, giving the Signet weapons and tools that no one thought to use. They had repaired and modified the engines, making the ship faster and more maneuverable than ever before. They had even restructured the entire command system, giving the crew more control, allowing them to react in real time to any situation. "What's important is that we don't wait for our enemies to make the first move," Ford continued. "We make our own moves. We don't follow the rules. We break them and make our own." The Zarnax officers listened closely, their curiosity growing. Ford could tell that, while they might not fully understand the human approach, they couldn't deny the results. The Signet had gone from being the weakest ship in the fleet to something far more dangerous. Ford wasn't finished, though. "It's not just about the ship, it's about the crew. Humans are survivors. We've faced challenges no one else has. Whether it's survival on a hostile planet or fighting against overwhelming odds, we always find a way to win." The Zarnax officer leaned back, thinking. He wasn't quite ready to accept that humans could be a threat, but there was no denying the facts. The Signet had performed far beyond its limits, and it wasn't just the ship, it was the humans aboard it who had made that possible. "You're telling us that the human success isn't a fluke?" the officer asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Ford smiled again. "We don't do flukes. We do results." The Zarnax were starting to understand. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they were about to see just how dangerous a species could be when it was underestimated for too long. The Signet had been the start, but the galaxy was about to see the full extent of what humanity could do when pushed. The Zarnax Empire, still reeling from the unexpected success of the Signet and its human crew, decided to test their strength again. They assigned the Signet to a mission they believed would be an easy victory, a simple task to destroy a rebel stronghold on a distant planet. To the Zarnax, this mission was a form of punishment for the ship and its crew, a way to prove that the Signet was still nothing more than a failure. But they had no idea what the humans had done to their ship. Captain Elias Ford and his crew stood on the bridge, preparing for the mission. The Signet was now more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's strength and adaptability. Ford's crew was ready to face the challenges ahead, but even they didn't fully realize the scale of what was coming. "We know what's at stake here," Ford said, turning to his crew. "The Zarnax think this is going to be easy. They think they've sent us on a suicide mission. But we're going to show them that humanity doesn't back down, no matter the odds." His crew nodded, each of them focused and ready. They'd fought together before, and they trusted each other. Now, it was time to show the galaxy what they were capable of. The Signet approached the planet, and Ford's team immediately went to work. The rebel forces were well established, hiding in the thick forests of the planet, their bases surrounded by traps and hidden defenses. It was a perfect location for an ambush, and the rebels were confident they would be able to defeat any attackers. But they weren't prepared for the Signet. Instead of engaging directly, Ford ordered his crew to use the ship's new capabilities to scout the area. The upgraded AI systems on the ship analyzed the terrain and the enemy's position, providing real-time data to Ford and his crew. The Signet's stealth capabilities, designed by human engineers, allowed the ship to move through the atmosphere undetected, giving them the element of surprise. Ford smiled. "We won't give them a chance to fight back. We'll break their lines before they even know what hit them." The crew worked quickly. They used the Signet's newly acquired weaponry, scavenged from old Zarnax ships, to take out key enemy defenses. The rebels had set up traps and ambushes, but the Signet was fast and unpredictable. The human crew adapted on the fly, using guerrilla tactics to dismantle the rebel forces one by one. As the rebel leaders realized what was happening, they tried to regroup and counterattack. But it was too late. The Signet had already disabled their communications and scattered their forces. The rebels couldn't even organize a defense. They were too disoriented, too unprepared for the relentless, fast-moving attack. When the final rebel base fell, Ford stood on the bridge, staring out at the planet below. It had been a swift and decisive victory, one that no one, not even the Zarnax, had expected. The Signet had proven once again that it was far more than the weakest ship in the fleet. It had become a nightmare for anyone who underestimated it. The Zarnax Empire watched from afar, their officers quiet and uneasy. The Signet had completed its mission with shocking efficiency. The rebels had been crushed before they had a chance to fight back. The Zarnax could no longer deny it. Humanity had turned the weakest ship into the most dangerous one in the fleet. Ford turned to his crew, his face serious but filled with pride. "We've only just begun. The Signet is ready for whatever comes next. Let's show the galaxy who we really are." The Signet had just started its transformation into something that no one, least of all the Zarnax, could have ever predicted. And the nightmare had only just begun. Captain Elias Ford stood at the bridge of the Signet, eyes fixed on the holographic map that displayed the galaxy's current state. His ship had won countless battles against the odds, but the quiet whispers of discontent from within the Zarnax Empire had started to grow louder. There were those in the Empire who could not accept the rise of the Signet. The ship, once considered a joke, was now a symbol of humanity's power and ingenuity. The Zarnax didn't like it. They didn't like how the Signet was turning into a force that might one day rival even their greatest warships. The whispers turned into something more dangerous, a plot to remove Ford and his human crew from the picture. At first, it started as a rumor. Some of the Zarnax officers were growing restless, seeing the Signet as a threat to their authority. They couldn't stand the thought of humans, a species they had once dismissed as inferior, leading a ship that was now feared across the galaxy. They were planning something, and Ford knew it. His instincts, honed over years of survival, told him that a betrayal was coming. A message was sent to Ford's personal console, one he knew would be important. He read it quickly, his face hardening. The Zarnax leadership had authorized the formation of a new fleet. The plan was to send the Signet on a high-risk mission into deep enemy territory, one from which the ship and its crew were unlikely to return. It was a test, and Ford knew it was more than that. It was a trap. Ford gathered his officers in the briefing room. They could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. "We've been set up," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "The Zarnax are planning to remove us from the picture once and for all. But they've underestimated us before, and they're doing it again." The crew looked at each other, their faces set in determination. They were a team, and they trusted Ford with their lives. They knew he would find a way to get them out of this situation. Captain Ford's eyes narrowed. "We're not going to fight their battle. We're going to turn the tables." Meanwhile, the mutiny within the Empire was already in motion. A faction of Zarnax officers, jealous of the human crew's success and growing power, decided to take matters into their own hands. They planned to sabotage the Signet, disable its systems, and eliminate Ford and his crew. They believed that once the ship was out of the picture, humanity would once again be seen as weak and insignificant. But they hadn't counted on the human crew's ability to adapt. Ford knew that the Empire wouldn't just throw them into a battle. They would throw them into an execution. So he acted fast. He had already anticipated a betrayal, and his crew was prepared. Using their expertise in hacking and stealth tactics, they infiltrated the Empire's communications network and exposed the plot. The mutineers, thinking they were one step ahead, found themselves surrounded by the very crew they had hoped to destroy. With a swift counterattack, Ford and his crew captured the mutineers. They didn't need to resort to violence. The Zarnax officers, once so confident in their plan, were quickly outwitted and forced to surrender. Ford stood over them, his expression cold but resolute. "You underestimated us. Ford said quietly. "You thought you could end us, but you've just learned that humans don't go down without a fight." The Zarnax officers, humiliated and defeated, were locked away. The mutiny had failed, but the damage to the Empire's unity was undeniable. The Signet and its human crew had once again proven their strength, against not just the enemies outside, but the treachery within the Empire itself. Ford turned to his crew. "This is only the beginning. We've just sent a message to the Zarnax. They'll think twice before they try to cross us again." The Signet had become more than just a ship. It had become a symbol of human resilience and defiance. And now, the galaxy was beginning to understand. The Signet was no longer the weakest ship in the fleet. It was a nightmare waiting to unfold. The Signet had overcome the Zarnax's betrayal, but as Captain Elias Ford stared out at the stars from the command center, he knew this victory wouldn't last long. The Zarnax Empire was a massive force, and the mutiny had only caused a ripple in their plans. They would regroup and come for the Signet again. But Ford didn't fear that. What worried him now was something far more dangerous. A new threat that had appeared from the shadows. Word had begun to spread about the Signet's success, and with it, the growing power of the humans aboard it. In the far reaches of space, beyond the borders of Zarnax control, a new faction had started to take notice. They were the Vrel, a race of highly intelligent and ruthless beings who valued only power and control. The Vrel had heard of the Signet's victories, and they saw the humans as a rising force that needed to be crushed before it became a serious challenge to their ambitions. Ford had studied the Vrel from the information he had gathered. They were no ordinary enemy. Their ships were unlike anything the humans had ever encountered, fast, stealthy, and equipped with technology that seemed to bend the very laws of physics. The Vrel believed in perfection. Their society was built on strength and intellect, and they would stop at nothing to ensure their dominance in the galaxy. Ford's crew, despite their success against the Zarnax, had never faced an enemy like the Vrel. "We have to be careful," Ford said to his crew one evening, after receiving word of the Vrel's interest. "We've proven ourselves against the Zarnax. But this is different. The Vrel won't underestimate us. They'll come at us with everything they have." His crew knew the stakes. The Signet had become a symbol of human ingenuity, but the Vrel didn't care about symbols. They cared about results, and they had the power to make the Signet and its crew disappear in the blink of an eye. Days passed, and soon the Signet received a new assignment. This time, it wasn't a mission from the Zarnax Empire. It was a warning. The message was brief but chilling. "The Vrel have arrived. Prepare for annihilation." Ford gathered his crew immediately. They had no time to waste. The Signet might be fast and adaptable, but the Vrel's technology was far superior. They would need more than just tactics and ingenuity to survive this time. They needed a new plan. "We're not going to outrun them, but we can outthink them," Ford said, his voice steady. "We'll have to fight smart, use everything we've learned and more. It's not about defeating them outright. It's about surviving long enough to hit them where it hurts." The crew was ready. They had trained for this moment, for the day they would face an enemy that seemed unbeatable. They would need to use every trick they had, from the ship's modified AI to the unconventional weapons they had scavenged from the wreckage of old battles. And Ford had one more plan. An alliance with other rebel factions in the galaxy, those who had fought the Vrel in secret for years. "Let's show the galaxy that we are not just survivors," Ford said, locking eyes with his crew. "We're going to make the Vrel regret ever coming after us." With the threat of the Vrel looming, the Signet and its crew prepared for a battle that would test their limits. The Zarnax Empire was nothing compared to what was about to come. The Vrel were coming, and for the first time, Ford felt the true weight of the war ahead. It was no longer just about the Signet. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy, and whether they could hold on to it when faced with an enemy that saw them as nothing more than an obstacle to their power. The Signet had become more than a ship. It was the last hope for humanity's survival against a new, terrifying enemy. The Signet drifted through deep space, the silence of the void around it almost deafening. Captain Elias Ford stood on the bridge, staring at the stars, his thoughts heavy. The Vrel were out there somewhere. He didn't know when they would strike, but he knew they would. And when they did, it would be unlike anything they had faced before. Ford turned to his crew. "We're not just defending ourselves anymore. This isn't about proving we belong here. This is about survival." His crew nodded in agreement. They had fought hard to earn their place in the galaxy, and now they had to fight even harder to keep it. The crew of the Signet had spent the past few days preparing, making last-minute repairs and adjustments to the ship. Ford had also contacted a few key rebel groups, ones that had survived encounters with the Vrel in the past. They needed allies, people who understood the enemy better than anyone else. "Get ready," Ford said, as he took his seat at the command center. "We're not going to wait for them to come to us. We're going to hunt them down first." The tension was thick, and Ford could feel the weight of every decision on his shoulders. Every move they made now could mean the difference between life and death, not just for them, but for humanity itself. The Vrel were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to crush anyone who threatened their supremacy. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional blip on the radar. Then suddenly, a strange signal appeared. It was faint at first, but growing stronger. The crew scrambled to track it. Ford's heart skipped a beat. "It's them," said Lieutenant Julia Matthews, her voice calm but tense. "The Vrel." They were close, too close. The Vrel's stealth technology made them nearly impossible to detect, but the Signet had been upgraded to recognize even the faintest of energy signatures. The crew had trained for this moment, and they were ready. Ford gave the order. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Engage stealth mode." The Signet activated its new systems, making itself nearly invisible to the Vrel's sensors. The ship's eye, which had been evolving since their first mission, adapted quickly, adjusting the ship's power output to avoid detection. But Ford knew they couldn't rely on stealth for long. The Vrel had technology beyond their imagination, and eventually they would find the Signet. The first attack came without warning. A burst of energy shot through space, hitting the Signet's shields with incredible force. The ship rocked violently, sending crew members scrambling to hold on. "Shields holding," reported Ensign David Lee, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But they're strong. They're not playing around." Ford's knuckles whitened on the armrest of his chair. He wasn't surprised. The Vrel didn't make mistakes, and they certainly didn't give their enemies a chance to retaliate. "Return fire," Ford commanded. "Target their engines. If we disable them, we can outmaneuver them." The crew worked quickly, launching a counterattack. The Signet's modified weapons systems fired energy blasts at the Vrel ship, striking its rear shields. The Vrel retaliated with a barrage of laser fire, tearing into the Signet's hull. The ship trembled under the assault, but the crew didn't back down. They fought back harder, using the ship's agility and quick reflexes to avoid the worst of the Vrel's fire. Ford watched the battle unfold, his mind calculating each move. The Vrel were more advanced, but the humans aboard the Signet had one thing the Vrel didn't: the ability to think creatively under pressure. "We're not just trying to win," Ford said, his voice steady. "We're trying to survive. Focus on their weaknesses." As the battle raged on, Ford could see a slight shift. The Vrel were starting to grow frustrated. Their attacks weren't landing as easily as they expected. The Signet was holding its own, using its speed and unpredictability to keep the Vrel guessing. "Keep pushing," Ford urged. "We've got them where we want them." The battle wasn't over, but it was clear that the Signet wasn't going down without a fight. The Vrel might be technologically superior, but they hadn't counted on one thing: humanity's relentless determination. "We'll make them regret ever coming after us," Ford muttered under his breath, as he watched the Vrel ship struggle to keep up with their evasive tactics. The humans aboard the Signet were proving once again that they could take on any challenge, even one as terrifying as the Vrel. The battle with the Vrel had been intense, and the Signet was showing signs of damage. Hull plates were scorched, the shields flickered in and out, and the ship's engines were running hot from the constant evasive maneuvers. But Captain Elias Ford wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. They had to find a way to take the fight to the Vrel, to turn the tide in their favor. On the bridge, the crew was working with relentless focus. The atmosphere was tense, but everyone knew what had to be done. Ford stood tall, watching the display of the battle as their ship danced around the Vrel warship's fire. "Can we make it to the nearby asteroid field?" Ford asked Lieutenant Matthews, who was studying the map of the surrounding space. "We can, Captain, but it's risky. The Vrel won't follow us into the field. They're too cautious, but we might be able to use the terrain to set up an ambush." Ford nodded, his mind working quickly. "Set course for the field, but don't get too close. We don't want them realizing our plan until it's too late." The Signet turned sharply, diving into the asteroid field. The large rocky asteroids created a chaotic landscape, with chunks of debris floating in every direction. The Vrel ship hesitated for a moment, clearly calculating whether to pursue. But the human ship had already disappeared behind a cluster of asteroids, making it impossible for the Vrel to get a clean shot. "We'll use this to our advantage," Ford said, his voice steady as he watched their enemy hesitate. "Activate the cloaking system. We're going to hide in the shadows and wait." The crew followed his orders, and the Signet's stealth system kicked into action. For the next few minutes, the ship was invisible to the Vrel sensors, hidden among the asteroids. Ford's team worked quickly, preparing the ship's weapons for a counterstrike. They had to make this attack count. If they didn't, the Vrel would destroy them. "We've got one shot at this," Ford said, eyes locked on the screen. "Let's make it count." As the Vrel warship slowly moved through the asteroid field, searching for the Signet, Ford gave the order. "Fire." In an instant, the Signet revealed itself from behind an asteroid, unleashing a barrage of laser fire at the Vrel ship's engines. The unexpected strike caught the Vrel off guard, and their shields were overwhelmed. The Signet quickly followed up with a second volley of missiles, targeting their weapon systems. The Vrel warship staggered under the blows, its shields weakening as the Signet danced between asteroids, using the terrain to stay elusive. The Vrel returned fire, but their shots missed, glancing off the large rocks that surrounded them. Ford grinned. This was their chance. "All power to the forward weapons," Ford commanded, and the Signet moved in closer for the final blow. The Vrel ship was now disoriented, struggling to recover from the surprise attack. With a precise shot, Ford targeted the Vrel ship's main reactor. The laser struck true, and for a moment, the enemy ship glowed with the heat of the explosion before it erupted into a brilliant flash of light. The Vrel warship was crippled, its engines now inoperable. "We did it," Lieutenant Matthews shouted, a mixture of relief and triumph in her voice. "We've crippled their ship." But Ford's face remained grim. "Not yet. Stay alert. They've got reinforcements." Even as they celebrated the success of the first strike, Ford knew the Vrel would never leave things unresolved. They would send more ships, more powerful forces. The battle had only just begun. The Signet had won the first round, but now it had to prepare for the next wave. Ford could feel the pressure building. The Vrel were relentless, but the humans aboard the Signet had proven something today. They could stand up to the impossible, and they would keep fighting until the Vrel learned to fear the name humanity. "We've bought some time," Ford said, looking out at the debris of the Vrel warship. "But we're not done yet. We fight on." And so, the Signet and its crew braced themselves. The war against the Vrel had truly begun, and they would face whatever came next with the same relentless determination that had carried them this far. The Signet had won a hard-fought victory against the Vrel, but Captain Elias Ford knew better than to think this battle was over. The Vrel were relentless, and they had already regrouped. Their reinforcements were on the way, and the Signet and its crew had no time to rest. It was a race against time now, to strike first before the Vrel could bring their full force to bear. Ford stood on the bridge, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders. The crew had done everything they could to prepare the ship. Shields were reinforced, weapons were recalibrated, and they had used every scrap of intelligence they could gather from the Vrel systems. But they all knew the truth. This was going to be their final stand. "Captain," Lieutenant Matthews said, her voice calm but filled with concern, "the Vrel fleet is approaching. They've got 3 warships, each bigger and more heavily armed than the last one we faced. We can't take them all on at once." Ford nodded grimly. "We don't need to take them all on. We just need to take down their leader's ship. If we cripple their command vessel, the rest of the fleet will fall apart." His crew, though exhausted from the previous battle, listened carefully. They had been through a lot, but there was no backing down now. Ford had never been one to shy away from the impossible. They had defied the odds before, and they would do it again. "We've learned from every fight," Ford said, looking out at the stars ahead. "We know their weaknesses. We know how they fight. And now we have one advantage they don't. We fight for more than just survival. We fight for the future of humanity." The Signet accelerated towards the oncoming Vrel fleet, a bold move that surprised their enemies. The Vrel ships immediately locked onto the Signet, their weapons charging for another barrage. But the Signet was faster and more agile than they expected. It dodged the incoming fire with ease, maneuvering through the debris of old space battles that littered the region. Ford's strategy was simple: draw the Vrel ships into a narrow part of the asteroid field, where their larger size would work against them. The asteroids would block their shots and limit their movement. The Signet would dart in and out of the field, using the rocks as cover to launch targeted attacks. "Target their command ship's engines," Ford shouted, and the crew got to work. The Signet fired a series of precision shots at the Vrel flagship, hitting their weak points with pinpoint accuracy. The Vrel commander didn't expect such an aggressive counterattack, and their shields began to buckle under the force of the human assault. The Vrel flagship tried to retaliate, but the Signet was already moving, faster than their sensors could track. As the battle raged on, Ford saw an opening. The flagship's main reactor was exposed. One final shot, and the fight would be over. "All power to forward weapons," Ford ordered. "Prepare to fire everything we've got." With a deafening roar, the Signet fired its most powerful energy blast directly at the reactor. The beam shot through space, a streak of light in the dark void, and struck the flagship's core. There was a moment of silence before the ship erupted in a brilliant explosion, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The Vrel fleet staggered, their commander's flagship destroyed. The remaining ships tried to regroup, but it was too late. The Signet and its crew had already proved their strength and resilience. The other Vrel ships hesitated, unsure of their next move. They had been dealt a blow they hadn't expected, a blow that came from the humans they had once underestimated. As the Vrel ships withdrew, Ford stood tall, his heart racing. He looked at his crew, who were breathing heavily but smiling in relief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. "We did it," Lieutenant Matthews said softly. "We stopped them." Ford nodded. "We didn't just stop them. We sent a message." The Signet had become a symbol of humanity's strength. It had once been the weakest ship in the fleet, but now it was a nightmare to anyone who underestimated the humans who manned it. As the Vrel retreated into the darkness, Ford looked out at the stars again. He knew this victory wouldn't be the end, but it was a beginning. Humanity had shown the galaxy that it would not be easily defeated, and as long as the Signet flew through the stars, humanity's light would continue to shine brightly. "We're not done yet," Ford said quietly. This is just the start.